The fuel formed from the dead plants and animals via a natural process called decomposition is called fossil fuel. The major usage of fossil fuel is done under the human activities such as small and large industrial operations, coal power plants, and via transportation mode as oil is being transported. The fossil fuel have their own advantages and disadvantages. Looking towards the bad side of the fossil fuel, that is disadvantages, this fossil fuel can vanish one day as they are non-renewable sources. The main root of the global warming is fossil fuel as they release a huge amount of nitrogen oxide in the atmosphere, which is leading to major environmental damage. This released nitrogen oxide can contribute in the formation of acid rain and smog, where some serious problems seen in human bodies due to this fossil fuel are heart diseases, asthma, pneumonia, cancer, and many other. Transportation of fossil fuel have a large impact on land as it includes unearthing, pipelines are fitted in the land, also have waste disposal and storage in the land. This all is affecting the nutrition level in the land, and this will also impact, and it is impacting on animal in respect to their habitat and their survival. Many companies are releasing this fossil fuel in water resources, which is leading to major water waste where aquatic organisms are being affected. Due to this all major environmental problems, fossil fuels are bad and are affecting the all living organisms on planet Earth.
Renewable energy is also known as clean energy or green energy. Why? It is because renewable energy resources are constantly being replenished. For example, as long as the moon keeps doing what the moon is doing, the oceans will always have tides. And we can utilize those tides to create and harness our own energy. There are multiple different types of renewable energy sources. One of the more commonly used is solar energy. The use of solar panels made of photovoltaic cells captures the sun's energy. Beyond the manufacturing and disposal process, solar panels have few environmental impacts. However, it would be misleading to not mention that the batteries, inverter, and meter needed to complete the whole system required to harness the sun's energy also have negative environmental impacts. All aspects of the system do create waste, but once installed, they can be utilized without further damaging the environment. Another renewable energy source is wind energy. This is harnessed all throughout the country. A great example is the city of Calgary's C-Train light rail system, which runs off of the wind power collected by two wind farms located outside of the city. Calgary Transit reports that they're avoiding the emissions of 56,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is quite a bit. And once again, the process to manufacturing the towering mechanical windmills produces waste, as well as emissions. But in the long run, wind and solar farms further diversify the energy sources us humans rely on a daily basis, while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The last two renewable energy sources I'm going to discuss all use water to some extent. First off is hydroelectric power. Due to the topography surrounding us, the movement of water creates another avenue to harness energy. Hydropower plants use a turbine to convert kinetic energy into mechanical energy, which eventually we can use. The building of these hydro plants negatively impacts the river or the water source that it is built on. An example is a river in British Columbia may not be able to support spawning salmon due to the altercations of the build. The least used renewable energy source that I'll discuss is tidal wave energy. As with all energy sources, the construction of tidal barrages or tidal fences or tidal turbines will negatively affect the ecosystem in which it is placed. Regardless of the green energy source that we use, investing in renewable energy sources will further diversify the energy we use and also supports the movement towards a more sustainable society.
With these alternative energy sources in mind, the question remains, How do we convince people who are suspicious of alternative energy sources that alternative energy is a more viable option than continuing to use fossil fuels? As a species, we are addicted to energy, especially in the more developed world. In Saskatchewan, 39.2% of our electricity is from natural gas, while 42.9% is from coal. So about 83% of our energy is from non-renewable resources, and this is a significantly high reliance on resources that are not only disappearing, but are also harming our planet. In 2018, Saskatchewan produced 489,000 per day of crude oil, and Canadian production of this oil is centered in Western Canada, which accounted for 95% of total production in this year. As a country, Canada is the fourth largest producer and sixth largest exporter of natural gas, and the third largest crude oil exporter. So as a country, we play a monumental role in the use of non-renewable energy. So for Western Canada and Canada in general, the switch to alternative energy sources will be a drastic change, not only to the lives of individuals, but also our country and economy as a whole. So with this in mind, we now ask, what would an alternative energy source have to do in order to convince people that the switch to green energy is necessary and desirable? We have determined that although a great transition fuel, alternative energy sources that require lithium batteries, such as wind and solar energy, are not a convincing enough energy source to make people who are apprehensive about alternative energy support the transition to green fuel. This is because lithium-ion batteries only last about 8 to 10 years, cannot be recharged, are expensive to make, and make transporting energy hard. In addition, alternative energy sources like solar power require that panels be placed somewhere. And if this occurs in a natural environment, these panels would be disrupting the ecology of the environment they are placed in. Therefore, when thinking about an ideal alternative energy source, we think that alternative energy should be able to power transportation and electricity. To do this, energy needs to be able to be stored and used only when needed. And this would require that the alternative source have high density of energy and packaging that is convenient and easy to transport. A good source would not fluctuate by season, be affected by weather, or threaten the environment in any way. Therefore, the more practical the energy source is, the better. Ideally, pre-existing infrastructure would be able to be adapted for an alternative energy source so that minimal construction or infrastructure would be needed to accommodate alternative energy in both the more developed world and the less developed world. This is why oil and refined oil products are so popular. They're easy to store, can be used whenever, transported quickly, and are high energy and density. Therefore, liquid energy should not be totally disregarded. We just need a liquid energy source that does not come from the ground and doesn't create emissions. So the question remains, is there an alternative energy source out there that meets this criteria? And can this fulfill the level of demand that society would expect of it?
There's a sweetgrass called sweet sorghum that is an excellent alternative energy source that meets the criteria Jaleesa just mentioned. Sweet sorghum is a high biomass and sugar-yielding C4 plant containing equal quantities of soluble sugars and insoluble carbohydrates called cellulose. This plant is important because it can produce a sugars-based ethanol. Ethanol is a 2-carbon alcohol that contains energy, is combustible, and is stored in liquid form as biofuel. Cellulosic ethanol from sweet sorghum plants may yield at least 4 times as much energy than is required to produce it, making it the best alternative energy source. Here's why. The sweet sorghum crop is tolerant to droughts, so it can be grown on poorer land and requires less water than other crops to grow. Over the next few years, farmers may begin to replace crops that are being grown on degraded land with sweet sorghum that can withstand these degraded conditions. Sweet sorghum that requires only 12 to 15 inches of rain per season, and because it's a long-rooted plant, it can extract residual nitrogen left over from previous crops, requiring less fertilizer from the farmers. Another bonus to growing sweet sorghum is the fact that it is a perennial crop, so it can be harvested for 5 to 10 years without the need to reseed. This gives farmers the opportunity to make the most amount of money per crop. Not only is sweet sorghum beneficial for the farmers to grow, but the plant itself can produce a ton of energy. There's enough juice in an acre of sweet sorghum to make 400 to 800 gallons of ethanol. This is because sweet sorghum stalks contain up to 75% juice, and up to 23% of that juice is sugar that can be fermented into ethanol. This produces 50 to 100% more energy per acre than corn, which is another popular form of biofuel. Corn is less favorable because of the amount of energy and water required to grow the crop and the long fermentation process it is to get the ethanol from it. Sweet sorghum, however, is regarded as the most promising source for ethanol production because of its high biomass yield, rapid growth rate, rich sugar content, and its clean, cost-effective production. Biofuel that are produced from renewable energy sources are gaining importance around the world due to rising fossil fuel prices, depleting oil reserves, and increasing greenhouse gases associated with the use of fossil fuels. Effective biofuels, such as ethanol from sweet sorghum, could help eliminate the demand for gasoline by 2050. We need an energy source where the rate of demand is similar to or less than the rate of supply to allow for a continued use of the resource. The use of sweet sorghum will work as an alternative, sustainable energy source as long as the demand to supply ratio for ethanol stays high into the future.